My name is Vera Sloan, and I'm 37 years old. 10 years after my parents publicly framed me and exiled me from my own life, my phone lit up with the first text from my mom in a decade. We are selling the company for $180 million. The buyers need a legacy resolution affidavit. Be at the Scottsdale Country Club tomorrow at 7 p.m. No apologies. No question mark. No, how have you been? Just a cold summon, the way you'd recall a disobedient servant. The text message cast a harsh blue glare across my kitchen island. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. I set my coffee mug down and walked straight to my desk. My fingers hovered over the laptop trackpad. I unlocked a heavily encrypted external drive and opened a single, buried folder labeled Phoenix 2016. The monitor instantly populated with hundreds of PDF documents, time-stamped network logs, and untouched audio files. 10 years of absolute silence, perfectly categorized and waiting in the dark. My parents needed my signature to walk away with millions. They assumed I was still the terrified scapegoat they drove out of the state. They forgot that surviving their betrayal forced me to become an auditor, a specialist hunting the exact type of corporate fraud they committed. I picked up my phone. My thumbs remained perfectly steady on the glass screen as I typed my reply. I'll be there. 10 years ago. My job was to find anomalies in the financial systems of my father's medical supply company. I found a massive one. A $1.2 million discrepancy. Carefully sliced and funneled into 3 untraceable shell vendors. I brought the printed ledgers straight to my father, Ronald. I placed the warm paper on his mahogany desk, fully believing he was the victim of a rogue executive. He studied the numbers, patted my shoulder, and promised me he would handle it. That same evening, my mother, down, collapsed onto our living room rug, clutching her chest and gasping for air. We rushed to the emergency room in my car. I left my work bag in the back seat, grabbed my keys, and sprinted through the sliding glass doors to find a doctor. The triage nurse made me wait by the desk to process the intake forms. In those exact 10 minutes, my mother walked out to the parking lot. She reached into my car, pulled my laptop from my bag, and logged into the corporate accounting server using a password she had watched me type 100 times. She drafted a meticulous confession. She wrote that I had embezzled the money to cover up my own severe data entry errors. And she hit send. By the time I rushed back outside with a wheelchair and an orderly, she was sitting on the bumper of my car, breathing perfectly fine. The next morning, the trap snapped shut. Ronald convened an emergency board meeting before I even woke up. He did far more than fire me. He went on the local noon news broadcast to address the sudden executive shakeup. He stared right into the camera lens, his eyes bloodshot, and choked out a flawlessly practiced sob. He told the entire city of Charlotte he was utterly heartbroken over his daughter's mental instability. He publicly terminated my employment, claiming he was stepping in to get me the professional help I desperately needed. My fiancé, Adrian, packed his bags 3 days later. He handed my engagement ring back to me in the driveway of our shared house. His father's clinic relied on Ronald's medical supplies to survive. Adrian chose a lucrative supply contract over our wedding, choosing to believe a manufactured lie rather than stand beside me. There is a reason victims of absolute family betrayal stay silent. There is a reason I packed 2 suitcases and took a bus to another state instead of tearing their lives apart in a courtroom right then. When the 2 people who are biologically wired to protect you orchestrate your execution with a warm smile, the mind simply shuts down. It falls into a deep, heavy paralysis. For 26 years, Ronald and Dawn trained me to be their designated shock absorber. My quiet competence was a convenient tool they used to clean up their messes. They weaponized my loyalty. They normalized my absolute destruction as a perfectly reasonable cost to keep their pristine country club image intact. I accepted the blame because, back then, the family ledger dictated that their survival was my fundamental responsibility. They broke my spirit completely that week. They stripped away my career, my reputation, and my future, leaving me with a hollowed-out life. But today, sitting in my kitchen with a decade of undeniable forensic evidence glowing on my monitor, my breathing is slow and calm. The terrified, obedient girl they exiled to the desert is gone. The woman they just invited to dinner is the one holding the hammer. The air inside the Scottsdale Country Club smelled like expensive wax and entitlement. I walked into the private dining room exactly on time. Ronald was already standing at the head of the long oak table, aggressively pouring champagne into crystal flutes. Dawn sat rigidly to his right. Her face tightened the second I walked through the double doors. She offered no greeting. Sitting across from her was Brianna. My younger sister wore a custom diamond tennis bracelet, the crown jewel of her supposedly self-made lifestyle brand. She swirled her water glass and looked past me like I was a stranger. Next to Ronald sat a man in a sharp gray suit, organizing a stack of legal documents. The family lawyer. They had set the stage perfectly. The lawyer skipped the pleasantries. He slid a thick, bound document across the pristine white linen tablecloth. The title page read Legacy Resolution Affidavit. It was a complete surrender. A legally binding admission that I caused the financial disaster 10 years ago. That I resigned voluntarily. And that I held zero claims against the company. Ronald raised his champagne glass. His voice dripped with that practiced, sickeningly sweet warmth he usually saved for television cameras. Family is about grace. Vera, he said, smiling magnanimously. We have all weathered difficult seasons. The past is the past. Tonight, we forgive, we heal, and we move forward. He tapped the rim of his glass against a silver spoon. The buyers are waiting on this final piece of paperwork to close the $180 million acquisition. Sign it, and we can all put this unfortunate history behind us. Dawn leaned forward. The diamonds on her neck caught the chandelier light. She picked up a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc pen and pushed it directly onto the center of the affidavit. The metal scraped harshly against the paper. Sign the paper, Vera, she whispered. Her voice carried the sharp, impatient edge of a mother scolding a toddler in public. We are offering you a clean slate. After the absolute shame you dragged this family through, the least you can do is sign your name and let your sister secure her future. Brianna finally looked at me. She adjusted her diamond bracelet and offered a tight, pitying smile. They honestly believed I was desperate for their crumbs. They thought a glass of champagne and a stern voice would instantly revert me to the terrified 27-year-old they threw to the wolves. I looked at the gold pen resting on the document. I looked at Ronald's expectant smile. I looked at Dawn's cold, calculating eyes. I kept my hands in my lap and left the pen exactly where she pushed it. Instead, I unclasped my leather bag and pulled out a single, thin manila folder. I set it down gently, right next to their meticulously drafted legal trap. The room went completely silent. You could hear the ice melting in Brianna's water glass. I rested my palms flat on the table, leaned in just a fraction, and looked directly into my father's eyes. Have the buyers told you what happens if the historical transaction is flagged as intentional executive fraud? The private dining room at the Scottsdale Country Club smelled like polished mahogany and unearned entitlement. I pushed through the heavy oak doors exactly at 7. The scene waiting for me looked like a perfectly staged corporate advertisement. Ronald stood at the head of a long table, aggressively pouring champagne into crystal flutes. His silver hair caught the soft chandelier light, entirely undisturbed by the reality of what he was doing. Dawn sat rigidly to his right, her mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. The second my shoes clicked against the hardwood floor, she checked her watch, making her annoyance perfectly clear. Sitting directly across from her was Brianna. My younger sister wore a custom diamond tennis bracelet, the absolute crown jewel of her supposedly self-made lifestyle brand. She swirled her ice water and fixed her gaze on the expensive wallpaper. The diamonds on her wrist were bought with the exact money they ruined my life to steal. Next to Ronald sat a man in a sharp gray suit, organizing a stack of legal documents. The family lawyer. The lawyer skipped the pleasantries. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and slid a thick, heavily bound document across the pristine white linen tablecloth. The title page stopped right in front of my empty plate. Legacy, Resolution, Affidavit. It was a complete, unconditional surrender. A legally binding admission that I caused the financial disaster 10 years ago, that I resigned voluntarily, and that I held zero claims against the company or its executives. Ronald raised his champagne glass. His voice dripped with that practiced, sickeningly sweet warmth he usually saved for television cameras and charity galas. Family is about grace. Vera, he said, smiling magnanimously. We have all weathered difficult seasons. The past is the past. Tonight, we forgive, we heal, and we move forward. He tapped the rim of his glass against a silver spoon. The sharp ring echoed off the walls. The buyers are waiting on this final piece of paperwork to close the $180 million acquisition. Sign it, and we can all put this unfortunate history behind us. Dawn leaned forward. The diamonds on her own neck caught the light. She picked up a heavy, gold-plated pen and pushed it directly onto the center of the affidavit. The metal scraped harshly against the thick paper. Sign the paper, Vera, she whispered. Her voice carried the sharp, impatient edge of a mother scolding a toddler in public. We are offering you a clean slate. After the absolute shame you dragged this family through, the least you can do is sign your name and let your sister secure her future. Brianna finally looked at me. She adjusted her diamond bracelet again and offered a tight, pitying smile. They honestly believed I was desperate for their crumbs. They thought a glass of champagne and a stern voice would instantly revert me to the terrified 27-year-old they threw to the wolves. I left the gold pen resting exactly where Dawn pushed it. I unclasped the brass lock on my leather bag and pulled out a single, thin manila folder. I set it down gently right next to their meticulously drafted legal trap. The room went completely silent. Ice clinked against the glass in Brianna's shaking hand. I rested my palms flat on the table, leaned in just a fraction of an inch, and looked directly into my father's eyes. Have the buyers told you what happens if the historical transaction is flagged as intentional executive fraud? The air inside my hotel room tasted stale. I folded my last silk blouse into my suitcase, zipping the luggage shut with a sharp, metallic grind. A heavy fist hammered against my door. 3 sharp, consecutive strikes. I pulled the handle back. A courier in a damp uniform shoved a thick, oversized envelope directly into my chest. He turned and walked down the hallway, requiring no signature. The paper in my hands was incredibly thick, expensive, textured cotton stock. The return address in the upper left corner belonged to one of the most ruthless, high-priced corporate litigation firms in Phoenix. My phone vibrated against my hip. Dawn's name flashed across the glass screen. Retract the files, or our lawyers will bankrupt you by Friday. I ripped the gold foil seal off the envelope and pulled out a 6-page cease and desist demand. The bold, black ink threatened a $50 million defamation lawsuit. The language demanded an immediate, a sworn retraction of the IP network logs and the audio recording I submitted to their buyers. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, designed to completely break a person's spirit. A normal civilian would have collapsed onto the edge of the hotel bed. They would have scrambled to call a defense attorney in a panic. They would have surrendered out of sheer financial terror. Ronald and Dawn assumed I was still the 27-year-old girl they chased out of town a decade ago. They completely forgot my actual profession. I spend my life dissecting fraudulent corporate empires. I carried the heavy document over to the window, holding the pages up to the harsh morning sunlight. The embossed logo in the top corner commanded attention. It was perfectly raised, perfectly crisp. The address listed underneath the logo, however, belonged to the firm's old downtown office. That specific firm moved their headquarters to a new glass high-rise 3 years ago. I traced my index finger down the heavy paper, moving past the aggressive legal jargon, stopping right at the blue ink signature line at the very bottom of page 6. Arthur Vance, Senior Managing Partner. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Arthur Vance was a familiar name. 4 years ago, I personally directed the compliance audit that exposed his offshore tax evasion network. The State Bar Association permanently stripped his legal license. Today, Arthur Vance resides in an assisted living facility in Boca Raton, Florida. Restricted to a diet of pureed foods and supervised walks, Ronald and Dawn were utterly desperate. They panicked. They broke into the country club's old administrative storage, stole a stack of outdated law firm letterhead, and manufactured a federal legal threat. They committed felony mail fraud just to scare me into saving their $180 million payday. The execution took less than 90 seconds. I laid the forged document flat on the glass coffee table and snapped 3 high-resolution photographs. I opened a new email draft. I attached the images, typed a single, precise sentence explaining the fraudulent signature and the disbarred attorney, and sent it directly to the buyer's chief compliance officer and the regional white-collar division of the federal authorities. No screaming matches. No dramatic phone calls. Just the quiet click of a send button. Within 2 hours, the empty civil dispute evaporated. It transformed instantly into an active federal criminal investigation. Agents secured a warrant for Ronald and Dawn's assets before my flight even touched down on the tarmac. The massive, golden empire they built on my ruined reputation shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces, destroyed entirely by their own stolen piece of paper. I stood at gate 42 in the airport terminal, holding a lukewarm cup of black coffee. The early morning light was just beginning to wash over the tarmac outside the massive glass windows. Above the boarding desk, a television monitor played the local news on a silent loop. A red breaking news banner rolled across the bottom of the screen. I watched the camera pan across the familiar manicured lawns of the Scottsdale Country Club. Federal agents in dark windbreakers were carrying heavy cardboard boxes out of the main administrative office. The camera cut to my father, Ronald, being guided into the back of a dark sedan, his wrists secured in steel handcuffs. The Golden Empire had completely collapsed. The $180 million acquisition vaporized the second the buyers received my encrypted files. Because I bypassed the civil courts and handed the forged legal threats directly to federal compliance officers, the justice was swift and absolutely merciless. Ronald eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and felony mail fraud. The federal judge sentenced him to 8 years in a federal correctional institution, along with a mandatory restitution order of $1.2 million. Dawn was formally indicted as a co-conspirator. Her pristine country club membership was immediately revoked. The same wealthy socialites she spent 20 years trying to impress completely erased her from their directories, pretending they had never met her. Brianna's self-made lifestyle brand went completely bankrupt overnight. Federal auditors seized her inventory, her diamond tennis bracelets, and her luxury vehicles to satisfy the massive tax liens my parents left behind. The entire family was stripped bare, left with nothing but the truth they had tried to bury. 14 months after the arrests, a thick envelope arrived at my front door. It carried a return address from a low-income apartment complex on the outskirts of Phoenix. I recognized the sharp, looping cursive immediately. It was Dawn's handwriting. She had managed to track down my new address. I opened the envelope standing right there in my foyer. The letter spanned 3 pages of desperate, tear-stained manipulation. She wrote about how hard things were. She wrote about the humiliation of taking the bus to the grocery store. She wrote, "I am still your mother. Vera. I did what I had to do for this family. You have made your point. Now it is time to forgive us and help your sister." 10 years ago, a letter like that would have broken me in half. I would have agonized over every word. I would have lost weeks of sleep, drowning in a toxic cocktail of manufactured guilt and desperate hope. Today, my pulse remained completely steady. The paper felt weightless in my hands. I walked over to the home office, fed all 3 pages directly into the mechanical shredder, and listened to the satisfying hum of the steel blades cutting her entitlement into tiny, unreadable ribbons. I never replied. I never looked back. The silence I offered them was total and absolute. My life today looks entirely different. I moved to the mountains of Colorado, where the air is crisp and the mornings are entirely my own. I built my own independent forensic auditing firm from the ground up. The people sitting around my dinner table now are not bound to me by a shared last name or a toxic obligation. They are my chosen family. They are brilliant, fiercely loyal colleagues, and deeply trusted friends who have earned their seats at my table through years of mutual respect. When we break bread together, there are no hidden ledgers. There is no walking on eggshells. There is only a profound, unbroken peace that comes from knowing you are valued for the person you are, not the problems you can cover up. If you are listening to this right now, I need you to hear me clearly. I need you to understand the actual psychology of a toxic family. To a narcissistic parent, a capable, empathetic child is never truly viewed as a human being. You are simply viewed as an asset. You are the designated shock absorber. Your entire purpose is to cushion the blow of their mistakes, to quietly carry the weight of their failures so their fragile egos can remain perfectly intact. Shedding the desperate need for their validation is the only way you will ever become untouchable. Through everything I survived, I learned 3 unbreakable rules. Rule number 1. Blood is merely a biological fact. Loyalty is a behavioral choice. You are absolutely allowed to walk away from people who actively destroy your mental health. Even if you share a last name, never set yourself on fire just to keep someone else's reputation warm. Rule number 2. True revenge is rarely loud. It does not require screaming matches or dramatic showdowns. True revenge is the quiet, methodical preservation of the truth, holding your ground until the exact moment the liars need your silence the most, and then simply refusing to give it to them. Rule number 3. The people who aggressively demand you let the past go are almost always the ones who are currently profiting from it. They do not want peace. They want a clean getaway. If you have ever been the shock absorber for someone else's lies, if you have a folder of receipts you have been too terrified to open, or a family table you have been too scared to walk away from, let this story be your sign. Your truth does not require their permission to exist. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Share this video with someone who desperately needs to stop auditing their self-worth on a toxic family's ledger. I am Vera Sloan, and I am finally free. I will see you in the next one.